Billionaire says, I don't shake hands with staff. Then the black woman makes a $10 billion move. Are you here for the diversity initiative? Robert Grant, the billionaire CEO of a prestigious tech company, asked Sarah Johnson with a condescending grin, his tone laced with arrogance. He then casually added, I don't shake hands with staff. The executives around the table nervously shifted in their seats, but Sarah, a black woman and powerhouse investor, didn't bat an eye. She simply replied, I'm not staff. I'm here to make a decision. Her response stunned everyone in the room. Sarah's calm yet confident demeanor wasn't just an act. It was the culmination of years of experience navigating industries where she was constantly overlooked because of her race and gender. But rather than playing by the usual rules, Sarah had learned how to turn these challenges into strategic advantages. In this video, we'll show you exactly how Sarah, using her intelligence and composure, flipped the script on Robert Grant's arrogance and made a decision that would shake his entire company and his ego. What started as a simple meeting turned into a billion-dollar move that changed the trajectory of both Sarah's career and Grant's company forever. Don't miss out on the full story. Stick with us to discover how Sarah's brilliance and leadership exposed the deeply embedded toxicity in Grant's company, and how she managed to turn that moment into a powerful statement that reverberated across industries. The sleek, glass doors of Virtu Tech, one of the most talked-about tech companies in the country, slid open as Maria Thompson stepped inside. At 42, Maria had worked her way through corporate America, often pushing past barriers that were built to keep people like her out. A black woman in a world dominated by white men, she had grown used to the skepticism, the dismissive gestures, and the microaggressions. But she had also learned how to turn those challenges into fuel for her success. She didn't need to be impressed by the flashy walls and marble floors of Virtu Tech. She needed to see if this company was ready to back up its promises with real action. The receptionist, a young woman in a pristine uniform, looked up from her desk. How can I help you? I'm here to see Mr. Grant, Maria said calmly, her tone unwavering. The receptionist checked the schedule, her fingers pausing slightly when she saw Maria's name. Please wait over there, she gestured, indicating a small, far-off corner of the lobby. Maria nodded and walked to the seats, the distance between where she stood and the VIP lounge not lost on her. Across the room, two white men in business suits were being served coffee in plush seats. Maria wasn't offended, but the unspoken message was clear. She wasn't the type they expected in their space. The type they assumed was worthy of being treated with respect. 45 minutes later, a young assistant finally escorted Maria to a narrow hallway, leading her to a small, windowless meeting room. The three executives seated around the table barely acknowledged her as she entered. Leonard Grant, the CEO of Virtu Tech, sat in his chair with his phone in hand, paying more attention to the screen than the person who could decide whether or not he'd receive a $10 billion investment. Maria, he finally said, waving lazily at the chair across from him. Please, take a seat. Maria sat down, carefully placing her portfolio on the table. The executives exchanged uncertain glances, unsure of how to proceed. They had expected someone else, a more familiar face, perhaps. But Maria was different. She wasn't just another investor. She was a black woman who had worked her entire career to be respected in spaces where she was often treated as less than. And she wasn't here to play by their rules. Leonard, after a few moments of silence, glanced at her. Let me walk you through what we do here at Virtu Tech, he said, finally breaking the silence. We're leading the way in AI development. Our products are cutting edge, and we're working with top-tier clients. Maria listened, but she wasn't impressed. She had read the prospectus. She had done her homework on Virtu Tech. What she needed to hear from them wasn't another sales pitch. She needed to know whether this company, like so many others, was willing to put in the work when it came to diversity, equity, and inclusion. I've reviewed your proposal, Maria said, her voice steady. But there's something that concerns me. In the materials you provided, I noticed something alarming. You claim to be an inclusive company, but the number of people of color in your executive team is almost non-existent. I want to know why. Leonard's eyebrows furrowed slightly, but he quickly masked his surprise with a practiced smile. Well, we have a diversity officer, and we're doing the best we can, he said, clearly trying to deflect the conversation away from the real issue. Maria wasn't interested in hearing about diversity officers or vague efforts. What's the percentage of people of color in your leadership? And how many of them have moved up the ranks? She asked pointedly. For the first time, Leonard hesitated. His eyes darted to the other executives, who exchanged looks of discomfort. He could feel the tension growing, and it was clear to him now that Maria wasn't going to let this conversation be about anything other than the truth. I think you're focusing on the wrong things, Leonard said after a pause, trying to steer the conversation back to the company's financials. Let me show you our numbers, our projections for growth, and how we plan to scale. Maria shook her head, cutting him off. You're still not hearing me, she said calmly. I'm not here for projections. I'm here because I want to see whether you can walk the walk. I've invested in many companies before, and what I've learned is this. You cannot expect to build a successful company if you're leaving out whole groups of people. Talent doesn't look like you think it does. And it sure doesn't look like this room. There was a long, uncomfortable silence as Maria's words sank in. She wasn't just talking about numbers. She was talking about people. People who were being overlooked, underestimated, and dismissed. People who could make a difference but were constantly left behind. Leonard shifted in his chair, clearly uncomfortable. Look, Maria, we're doing our best, he said, his voice defensive. We've made some changes recently. I don't think this is the place to get into it. Maria didn't flinch. No, this is exactly the place, she said, her eyes locked onto his. You want my $10 billion investment? Then you need to show me that you're ready to change. Diversity isn't a box to check. It's the foundation of success in today's world. If you can't see that, then I don't think I'll be moving forward with this. The room went silent. The three men at the table seemed to shrink as they realized they had underestimated her. They thought they could brush her off, that they could treat her like one of the many other investors who had come and gone. But Maria wasn't just another investor. She wasn't a person to be dismissed because of her race or gender. She had worked hard for every ounce of respect she earned, and she wasn't going to let it slip away. Leonard Grant, finally realizing the gravity of the situation, spoke again, though his voice now lacked its earlier confidence. I think maybe we need a break, he suggested, a clear attempt to regain control of the situation. Let's get some coffee in. Maria cut him off again, her voice firm. No, you can go ahead with the coffee. I'm done here. I'll be taking my business elsewhere. She stood up, slowly, with the kind of quiet authority that sent a ripple through the room. Maria closed her portfolio, the sound of the leather binding snapping shut like the final nail in the coffin. As she turned to leave, she knew she had made the right decision. These executives, these so-called leaders, had shown her exactly what she needed to see. They had shown her how deep the problem ran, and she wasn't about to be a part of it. As she walked out of the room, the executives exchanged glances, unsure of what had just happened. Maria Thompson wasn't just another investor. She wasn't someone they could dismiss with a smile and a few empty words. She was someone who had the power to make or break them. And she had just made her decision. The power had shifted, and Maria had just set the stage for what would be a monumental move. Sarah had seen it all before. The stories about how men like Robert Grant operated in boardrooms, dismissing the intelligence and capabilities of others based solely on appearance and status. She had grown accustomed to this kind of treatment, but this time, she wasn't just going to let it slide. She had a purpose, and she was here to make an impact. As Sarah walked into the room, the coldness of the atmosphere hit her immediately. The team of executives, all white men dressed in their polished suits, stood around the table, chatting amongst themselves. The air was thick with their unspoken assumptions about who belonged and who didn't. They looked at her briefly, barely acknowledging her presence as she settled into the chair at the table. She could feel the eyes of Robert Grant on her, his gaze one of mild curiosity, but also, Sarah could tell, one of dismissal. He wasn't taking her seriously, and that was exactly what she needed. Robert began the meeting with his usual confident air, his voice smooth and calculated. He went on about the company's recent developments, their growth in the tech industry, and the next big thing they were working on. Sarah barely listened to the details. She had heard this pitch 100 times before, empty promises of innovation and success, but always with a lack of substance. She had no interest in hearing about the numbers or the flashy graphics on their presentation slides. She was here for one thing, to evaluate whether this company was worthy of her investment. As Robert continued, Sarah stayed silent, her mind sharp and focused. She observed the way he and the others in the room interacted, how they subtly made her feel like an outsider. The dismissive glances, the slight shifts in posture whenever she spoke. It was all too familiar. She had learned to recognize this behavior over the years, and today was no different. She could see through the act. She wasn't here to play games. She was here to make a decision, and she wouldn't let anyone's arrogance stand in her way. The meeting continued, and Sarah felt more and more the weight of the room's skepticism. She had been here before, in these spaces where her presence was met with doubt. But this time, it felt different. The disrespect was palpable. It wasn't just a glance or a comment. It was a culture that saw her as nothing more than a checkbox for diversity, someone to be tolerated rather than truly valued. It was clear that they didn't believe she could truly grasp the intricacies of their tech or their financial strategies. At one point, Robert asked if she had any questions, his tone laced with condescension. He didn't expect her to have anything of value to add. Sarah's heart didn't race. It didn't even skip a beat. She knew exactly what she needed to do. She raised her hand slightly, her voice calm and controlled as she asked, "What's the diversity of your leadership team?" The question hung in the air, and she could see Robert flinch. He wasn't expecting that. In his mind, this was about money, about numbers, and not about something as trivial as diversity. He chuckled nervously, clearly unprepared for the question, and his smile faded just a little. "Well, we've made progress," he said, a half-hearted attempt to brush it off. Sarah pressed further, her voice steady. "How many people of color are in your executive ranks? How many women are in senior leadership roles?" She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She was simply stating facts, forcing him to confront the truth that he had been avoiding. His response came with the same tired excuses. "We're working on it," he muttered, clearly irritated by the line of questioning. But Sarah wasn't about to let it slide. She wasn't just here to talk about the financials. She was here to hold them accountable. Her patience, her silence, her calm, everything she did was calculated. She allowed Robert and his team to dig themselves deeper into a hole of their own making. The more they stammered, the more they revealed their true priorities. They were playing the game. She was setting up the board. As the meeting continued, Sarah observed the subtle ways they tried to diminish her. The offhand remarks, the deliberate avoidance of eye contact when she spoke, the insistence on discussing topics they assumed she wouldn't understand. All of it worked in her favor. They had no idea who they were dealing with. When Robert asked her again if she had any questions, Sarah finally broke her silence. "I've read your latest diversity report," she began, her voice cutting through the room. "It doesn't align with what I'm seeing here." She paused for a moment, watching him squirm in his chair. "You say you're committed to diversity, but your leadership looks like it's stuck in the past." The room grew still. The air thickened with tension as Robert's face turned a shade paler. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not in front of his colleagues. But Sarah wasn't intimidated. This was her moment, and she wasn't going to let it slip away. She continued, her words deliberate, her tone unwavering. "I'm not here for window dressing. I'm here to see if you're genuinely committed to change. And if you aren't, I'll be walking out of this room, and you'll be losing $10 billion in investment." She let those words hang in the air for a moment, watching as the room shifted. She didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to be loud or aggressive. She was simply stating facts. Robert, who had assumed control of the room, now seemed smaller than the man who had walked in with so much confidence. She had him where she wanted him. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife, and for the first time, Robert seemed unsure of himself. His face twisted in frustration, and he gave her a tight smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. "Perhaps we should take a break," he suggested, his voice strained. Sarah didn't take the bait. She knew he was trying to buy himself time, but it was too late. The damage had already been done. She had planted the seed of doubt in his mind, and now it was only a matter of time before the truth came crashing down on him. She didn't need to make a scene. She didn't need to raise her voice. Sarah had always known that silence was just as powerful as any words. The more they squirmed, the more they revealed their own weaknesses. And in that moment, she knew that the power was hers. She had made her move, and the game had just begun. The room was tense, and Sarah could feel the shift. Robert Grant, who had started the meeting with such self-assurance, was now visibly uneasy. He was used to controlling the narrative, to dictating the terms of every deal. But Sarah had just flipped the script. His arrogance had clouded his judgment, and now he was on the defensive. He fumbled with the remote, advancing the slides on the screen, hoping to regain some semblance of control. But Sarah wasn't looking at the screen. She was watching him closely, studying his every movement. Every word he said now felt hollow. Every slide he presented felt rehearsed, as if they were distractions, meant to divert attention away from the uncomfortable truths she had just brought to light. Robert's voice lacked the conviction it had earlier. "Well, as I said, we're making improvements." His words trailed off, and Sarah saw right through them. He was trying to steer the conversation back into familiar territory, the comfortable space where he held the power. But this time, Sarah wasn't following him. She had already set the stage for something far more significant. She remained calm, but every word she spoke carried weight. "I'm not interested in what you've done in the past, Robert. I'm interested in the future. Your future. The company's future." She watched as the executives shifted in their seats, some glancing nervously at one another, others avoiding her gaze altogether. They were starting to realize that this wasn't just another meeting. This was the moment where everything changed. Robert's confidence had completely evaporated, replaced by an uncomfortable tension. He wasn't sure whether to continue with the presentation or acknowledge the elephant in the room. Sarah could see that he was trying to recalibrate, trying to find a way to regain control. But Sarah wasn't here for a smooth pitch. She was here for the truth, and she was determined to get it. "You've built a great company," Sarah continued, her voice steady. "But your leadership, your lack of genuine diversity and inclusion, this is what will keep you from moving forward. And you know that. This isn't about me asking for a seat at your table, Robert. It's about your table being the right one for everyone, not just the people you find comfortable." The silence that followed was palpable. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in on Robert as he tried to process what was being said. But Sarah wasn't backing down. She had done her homework. She knew exactly what she was dealing with. This was a test, and she was passing it with grace and precision. The other executives were visibly uncomfortable now. Some shifted in their seats, while others exchanged furtive glances, clearly aware that Sarah had struck a chord. It wasn't just about diversity anymore. It was about a deep-rooted culture that was slowly suffocating the company's potential. And the more Sarah spoke, the more the room realized that she was not going to let it slide. Robert's assistant, who had been standing in the corner, nervously stepped forward, offering the usual pleasantries, trying to change the subject. "Mr. Grant, perhaps we should continue with the next slide." "No," Sarah interjected, her voice firm. "We're done with the slides, Robert. Let's talk about the future. Let's talk about the fact that the world is changing, and if you want to stay relevant, you need to change with it." Robert blinked, his face flushed. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not in this manner. He was used to having people defer to him, to people in his position taking the lead while others fell in line. But Sarah wasn't like the others. She was a force, an undeniable presence, and she was making her voice heard. The room was still. The executives had fallen silent, realizing that there was no way to avoid the uncomfortable conversation unfolding before them. Sarah had them exactly where she wanted them. It was now or never. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes never leaving Robert. "Let's be clear," she said, her tone now sharpening. "I'm not here to play games. I'm here because I believe in real, sustainable change. And I believe that you," she gestured to Robert and the team, "can do better. But I won't sit here and let you hide behind false promises and empty gestures. The world is watching, and the investors are too. If you want my money, you have to prove that you deserve it. And that means facing up to the fact that your company's culture isn't just outdated, it's toxic." There was no response, no rebuttal. The words hung in the air like a challenge, daring them to take action or admit defeat. Robert opened his mouth to speak, but closed it again, unable to find the words. He had no defense. Sarah had taken everything he had built, everything he had believed, and torn it down with nothing more than her conviction. Finally, Robert let out a long breath, his shoulders slumping slightly. He couldn't look her in the eye. It was clear that the game had shifted. He had underestimated her. He had assumed that her being a black woman, her being someone he thought didn't belong in that room, would make her an easy target. But Sarah had shown him how wrong he was. "You're right," Robert muttered, his voice low and resigned. But what do you want me to do? You're asking for a complete overhaul of everything we've worked for. Sarah's gaze softened, but she didn't let up. No, Robert, she said gently, but with undeniable power. I'm not asking you to overhaul everything. I'm asking you to open your eyes and see the opportunity that's right in front of you. I'm asking you to invest in your people, in their potential, because right now, you're leaving so much on the table and you're blind to it. The silence that followed was thick, heavy with the weight of her words. For the first time, Sarah could see Robert grappling with something he had never had to face before. The truth that his company, despite all its success, was built on a flawed foundation. It wasn't just about profits anymore. It was about leadership, inclusivity, and the ability to adapt to the changing world around them. As the room stood still, Sarah realized that she had done what she came here to do. She had opened their eyes. She had made them confront the very thing they had been trying to ignore. And in doing so, she had taken control of the narrative. The ball was now in their court. But Sarah wasn't done yet. She wasn't going to leave until she had made one thing crystal clear. They would either change or they would fail. There would be no in-between. The meeting was far from over, but the game had shifted. Sarah's calm resolve had done what words alone couldn't. She had forced them to see the flaws in their culture, flaws that were too big to ignore. The question now was whether they would rise to the challenge or continue down the same destructive path. As the conversation resumed, Sarah's mind was already racing ahead, considering her next move. She had set the stage for something bigger. This wasn't just about one investment. This was about transforming an entire industry. And she wasn't going to stop until she saw it through. But just as Sarah prepared to take the next step, she felt something shift in the room. The tension had eased, just a fraction. Robert had stopped fighting, at least for now. And that was a win, even if it was only a small one. It was at that moment that Sarah knew. She had them exactly where she wanted them. The only thing left to do now was watch as the pieces fell into place. The real power move was about to unfold, and Sarah was ready to take it. The energy in the room had shifted, but Sarah wasn't about to let her guard down. The executives around the table, once so confident and dismissive, now looked more like people struggling to find a way out. But they had nowhere to run, no more excuses. The truth had been laid bare, and it was up to them to face the consequences of their actions. Robert Grant, now deflated, stared at his phone, eyes flickering between the screen and the conference table. His earlier arrogance had been replaced with an almost desperate energy, as though he was searching for a lifeline. Sarah knew it wasn't just her words that had caused the change. It was the realization that he had underestimated her, thought she was just another investor to placate, a woman to brush off. But now, Sarah had shown him that his assumptions were nothing but a house of cards. "I think we need to take a step back here," Robert said, his voice low. "We're talking about a lot of changes, Sarah and I." "You're right," Sarah interrupted, her voice steady but resolute. "You need to take a step back. But let me be clear, this isn't just about changes. This is about survival. You either evolve or you become obsolete. Simple as that." The words hung in the air, the weight of them settling over the room. Sarah could see the executives around the table visibly shrink back, not from her words, but from the reality of what they were facing. The game had changed, and they knew it. "Let's get one thing straight," Sarah continued, leaning forward slightly, making sure her presence filled the room. "I'm not here to play games. You all can laugh at diversity initiatives, ignore the issues of inclusion, pretend like the world hasn't changed. But the fact is, the world has changed, and it's leaving companies like yours behind. I've seen it before, and I'm not about to sit here and watch it happen again. I didn't come here to be ignored." She let her words sink in, giving the executives a moment to reflect. It was clear that some of them were beginning to understand that this meeting wasn't just about money. It wasn't just about a simple investment. This was a reckoning, and Sarah was the one who had brought it. Robert shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearing his throat. "Sarah, we're listening. But we also need time to." "No," she cut him off again. "You don't get time. You get action. Right here. Right now. If you want my $10 billion, you'll show me real commitment to change. Not just in your hiring practices, but in your leadership, in your corporate culture. I'm not interested in your half-hearted diversity initiatives. I want to see action." The rest of the executives, who had been quiet up until now, exchanged looks. murmuring quietly amongst themselves. Sarah knew they were trying to figure out how to salvage the situation, but she wasn't going to let them off that easy. "Show me your board," Sarah continued. "Show me how many women or people of color are in leadership positions at your company. And if the answer is what I suspect it is, then I'm out. And this meeting? It'll be the last one you ever have with an investor like me." The challenge was clear. It was a dare, a statement that would force them to either step up or walk away in defeat. Sarah wasn't about to let them hide behind excuses. She had already seen enough to know that this was the moment of truth. Either they would put their money where their mouth was, or they wouldn't. Robert seemed to gather his composure, though the unease in his eyes remained. "I can't promise you the moon," he said slowly. "But I'll tell you this. We're committed to doing better." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Better isn't good enough. Not anymore. We're well past that point. You either lead, or you fall behind." The silence in the room grew heavy, as if everyone had finally realized that Sarah wasn't going anywhere. She wasn't just another investor to placate with vague promises and corporate speak. She was a force, a disruptor, and they couldn't dismiss her like they did the others. Her reputation had preceded her, but this was different. This was personal. A few moments passed before Sarah broke the silence again, her voice calm but unwavering. "Let's stop pretending here. Let's talk numbers. I'll give you the opportunity to prove to me that you're serious. You've got 2 weeks. I want a comprehensive plan, one that shows me exactly how you'll fix this. Show me how your company is going to evolve and lead by example. Show me how you're going to integrate true diversity at every level." A murmur passed through the room, and Robert's expression darkened, but he knew she was right. He had no choice but to comply or risk losing everything. 2 weeks, he repeated, his voice thick with resignation. "We'll have something for you by then." But Sarah wasn't done. "I'm not just talking about a piece of paper, Robert. I'm talking about real change, real accountability. I want transparency. I want to know exactly what steps you're taking to remove the biases that are embedded in your company's culture. I want to know how many women are in your C-suite. I want to see how many people of color have been given the opportunity to rise in your organization." Robert's shoulders slumped, and Sarah could see that, despite his earlier bravado, he was beginning to grasp the weight of the task ahead of him. But Sarah wasn't going to back down now. She had made her point, and there was no turning back. "You've got your 2 weeks, Sarah said again, her voice firm. "But know this. If I don't see real commitment by then, I'm pulling my $10 billion. And you'll be left with nothing." The room fell into a tense silence once again, and for a brief moment, Sarah allowed herself to feel a surge of satisfaction. She had made her move. She had set the stage for change. And now, it was up to them to either step up or step aside. As the meeting came to an end, Robert stood up, his hand extended toward her. But this time, Sarah didn't flinch. She didn't look away. She met his gaze directly, holding her ground. She knew this was far from over, but this was the beginning of something much larger than just one company. This was about changing the way the world did business. This was about making sure that every company, no matter how big or powerful, was held accountable for the culture it created. She shook his hand, but it wasn't a gesture of camaraderie. It was a challenge, a promise that she wasn't going to back down until the world changed, and she was going to be the one to change it. As she walked out of the room, Sarah felt the weight of the battle she had just begun. She wasn't done, not by a long shot. The next move would be even bigger, even more calculated. And this time, they would have no choice but to listen. But as she exited the building, she couldn't help but smile. She had planted the seed, and now it was up to them to water it. The next chapter was about to unfold, and Sarah was ready to write it. But first, there was something she needed to do. The days that followed the meeting were a blur of intense activity. Sarah knew that the executives at the tech company had taken her words to heart. At least, she hoped they had. They had a deadline now, and with it, a chance to prove that they were serious about change. But Sarah wasn't about to sit back and wait for them to deliver. She had already taken the first steps to ensure that they knew the stakes were higher than they could possibly imagine. As Sarah sat in her office, the city skyline spread before her. She reflected on the events of the past week. The meeting, the words exchanged, the way the executives had seemed so dismissive, and how quickly they'd shifted once they realized the gravity of the situation. She could feel the pulse of her mission now. It wasn't just about investments and returns. It was about correcting a systemic injustice. It was about setting a standard. And the change she was about to spark wasn't just for one company, but for an entire industry. She picked up the phone and dialed David, her CFO. She didn't need to say much. He knew what was coming. "We're moving forward," Sarah said once David answered. "I want our team to start gathering every piece of information we can. The financials, the hiring records, everything. I need to know what this company's made of, and if they fail to meet our terms, we'll be prepared." David's voice crackled with determination. "We've already got a team working on it. We'll have all the documents ready. I'll have a report on your desk by tomorrow." "Good," Sarah said, clicking her pen thoughtfully. "Now, I want to get ahead of this. If they fail to come through with what they've promised, I want to make sure we've got every angle covered. We'll need the media involved, too. Let's make sure we've got a statement ready, should we need it." David hesitated, but only for a moment. "I'll get to work. We'll be ready." As Sarah hung up the phone, she leaned back in her chair, considering her next steps. She had made it clear what was at stake, but she couldn't trust them to come through just because they promised they would. Her next move had to be bigger. It had to be decisive. Sarah was about to shift from passive observation to active engagement. She had already changed the dynamic in that boardroom, but now she needed to take that momentum and turn it into a force that would be impossible to ignore. That evening, she sat down to compose an email. It was direct, no nonsense, and left no room for ambiguity. She outlined what they were required to present in 2 weeks, a comprehensive breakdown of diversity at every level of their organization, transparent financials, and concrete evidence that they were making significant strides in their inclusivity efforts. She also demanded real data on their hiring practices and promotion rates for women and people of color. She wanted proof that they were serious, not just about lip service, but about making a real impact. Once the email was sent, Sarah took a breath and stood up from her desk. She knew this was just the beginning of a much larger battle. The tech industry wasn't just a field of innovators and disruptors. It was also an industry deeply entrenched in old-world thinking. And Sarah wasn't going to let them get away with hiding behind outdated norms. The next few days felt like a whirlwind of constant phone calls, meetings, and strategy sessions. Sarah's team worked tirelessly, sifting through mountains of data and analyzing every scrap of information they could find on the company. It wasn't just about getting their investment. It was about forcing the company to reckon with the way it had operated for so long. Sarah wasn't going to stop until they realized the cost of doing business the old way. Meanwhile, Robert Grant, who had once so confidently dismissed her in the boardroom, began to show signs of strain. His calls became more frequent, though he still avoided giving any concrete answers. His emails grew more defensive, pushing the deadline back, offering excuses, trying to stall. But Sarah wasn't going to let him drag his feet. Her resolve had only strengthened since their first meeting. She had no intention of backing down, not now. One afternoon, 2 weeks after the meeting, Sarah sat in her office, reviewing the latest report from her team. The data was damning. The company's diversity statistics were abysmal, their financial reporting inconsistent, and their commitment to change was questionable at best. But even more telling was the fact that the executive team, the ones responsible for making the real decisions, had done little to nothing to address these issues. It was clear now. This wasn't just a matter of fixing their diversity problem. It was about rebuilding the entire foundation of their culture. She picked up the phone again, dialing Robert's number. He picked up after 2 rings. "Sarah," he said, his voice clipped. "I've just received your latest email, and I have to tell you, I'm concerned about some of the demands you're making. You're asking for a lot in a very short amount of time." "Robert," Sarah replied, her tone unwavering. "You don't have the luxury of time. You've had years to fix this, and you've chosen not to. Now you're going to do it my way, or we're done. There's no negotiation here. I understand, but—" "No buts," Sarah interrupted, her voice firm. "You've got 2 options. You either show me that you're serious about change, or you don't. If you choose the latter, you'll never see a penny from me, and I'll make sure everyone in the industry knows why." The line was silent for a moment, and then Robert spoke again, his voice softer this time. "I'll get the information to you. But I need you to know, this isn't as simple as you think. We have a lot of people invested in our current model." Sarah could almost hear him sweating. "Robert," she said slowly, "if you want to keep your company afloat, you're going to have to change. The way things are being done right now isn't just costing you your credibility. It's costing you your future." Another silence passed, this one longer than before. Sarah didn't wait for him to respond. She ended the call, knowing full well that it wasn't over. In fact, this was where the real work began. As the deadline approached, Sarah continued to tighten her grip on the situation. Her team had prepared every contingency plan, and her legal department was ready to move forward with the necessary steps if the company failed to deliver on its promises. She had made it clear that this wasn't just about a failed investment. It was about accountability, and it was about making sure that the next wave of companies understood that discrimination, in any form, would no longer be tolerated. The pressure was mounting, and as the 2-week mark approached, Sarah could feel the weight of the decision hanging in the air. Would they deliver? Or would they continue to pretend that things hadn't changed? She couldn't afford to be complacent. There was too much at stake now, and she had already made it clear that she would not back down. The day before the deadline, Sarah received another call. It was Robert again. His voice was noticeably more reserved this time. "Sarah," he said, "we've been working with our team, and we've gathered everything you requested. We've restructured our diversity initiatives, and we're implementing new policies immediately. I think you'll be pleased with the changes we've made." Sarah leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. "I'll decide that for myself when I see the full report. I'll be in touch after I review everything. But don't make the mistake of thinking this is the end. It's only the beginning." Robert didn't respond. He knew as well as she did that tomorrow's report would either make or break the deal. Sarah sat still for a long moment after the call ended. The pieces were falling into place, but there was still much to be done. Tomorrow, she would see if they had truly listened. Tomorrow, she would know if they were finally ready to face the future or if they would fall behind. And when that moment came, Sarah would be ready to make her move. The game was just beginning, and Sarah wasn't backing down. Not now, not ever. The day Sarah had been waiting for finally arrived. The deadline loomed, and everything had come down to this moment. As she sat in her office, reviewing the documents in front of her, she couldn't help but feel a sense of both anticipation and apprehension. This wasn't just about a simple investment anymore. It was about making a statement. A declaration that the old ways were over and that a new, more inclusive and accountable corporate landscape was emerging. She had already made her stance clear. They would either comply with her demands for transparency and action, or they would be left behind. And if she was being honest with herself, she wasn't sure if they were ready for the kind of change she was proposing. The executives at the tech company had never faced someone like her, someone who was willing to take a stand, to walk away from a deal worth billions, if it meant holding them accountable. As the hours ticked by, Sarah sat back and reflected on the journey that had led her here. She'd spent years fighting to carve out a place for herself in an industry dominated by men and people who didn't look like her. The struggles had been numerous: discrimination, microaggressions, and the constant need to prove herself. But none of that had broken her. If anything, it had made her stronger. And now, she was poised to change the industry for good. The call came just after lunch, right when Sarah had settled into a quiet moment of contemplation. It was Robert. His voice was cautious, but there was a slight edge to it, a sense of urgency she hadn't heard before. "Sarah, we've got the report ready. The team's finalized everything, and we've made the changes you requested. I've attached the new diversity and inclusion strategy, along with the financials you wanted to see. You should have everything by now." She paused for a moment before speaking, her voice measured but firm. "Good. I'll be reviewing it shortly. But let me be clear, this isn't just about papering over the issues. If you want my investment, you'll need to show me concrete steps. I'll know if this is just a temporary fix or a genuine shift." Robert's tone faltered slightly. "Of course, Sarah. We're committed to making real change here. This isn't just for show." She wasn't convinced. The words sounded too rehearsed. But she had come this far, and she wasn't about to let them off easy. "I'll be in touch after I've had a chance to review everything. Don't assume this is a done deal just because you've provided the paperwork. I'm looking for action, not just promises." As she hung up the phone, Sarah felt a knot form in her stomach. She knew that whatever came next would determine the future of this deal. She had put herself on the line, both professionally and personally, and she wasn't about to let these executives get away with skirting the issue. She dove into the report, analyzing every page, every statistic, every claim. On paper, it looked good. The diversity numbers had improved slightly, the financials were in order, and the company had put together a polished proposal outlining their new commitment to change. But Sarah knew better than to be swayed by surface-level improvements. She had seen enough corporate presentations to recognize when someone was trying to sell her a story. The deeper she dug, the more she saw the cracks in their plan. The diversity initiatives seemed promising, but there was a distinct lack of concrete timelines or accountability measures. The financials, while solid, failed to address the systemic issues that had led to their past failures. And worst of all, there was no real sense of urgency in their actions. It was as if they were merely going through the motions to appease her, rather than genuinely committing to the kind of transformation they needed. By the time Sarah reached the end of the report, her initial optimism had turned to frustration. She knew she had to act quickly. She had to let them know that this wasn't enough. If they wanted her billions, they would have to prove themselves. She couldn't let them off the hook now. She picked up the phone again, dialing Robert's number. This time, when he answered, there was no pleasantry in her tone. "Robert," she said, her voice sharp, "I've gone through the report. And I have to tell you, I'm disappointed. You've made some progress, but it's not nearly enough. This is a temporary fix, not a long-term solution." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. Sarah could almost hear Robert scrambling to find the right words. "What do you mean? We've put together everything you asked for." "Not everything," she shot back. "You've given me numbers, but no real strategy for how you're going to ensure these changes stick. I see no commitment to real accountability. You're still not addressing the root of the problem, how your leadership culture has perpetuated this cycle for years." "Sarah, we've made adjustments," Robert said, his voice growing defensive. "We're moving in the right direction. You can't expect overnight change." "I don't need overnight change," Sarah replied, her patience wearing thin. "But I need to see that you're willing to make the hard choices. That means not just throwing a diversity report at me, but showing me that you're ready to overhaul your culture, your entire approach. This is a $10 billion investment, and I'm not about to hand it over just to watch you continue business as usual. You need to show me that you're serious." Robert was quiet for a moment. Sarah could tell he was processing her words. Finally, he spoke again, his voice more measured now. "What do you want from us, Sarah? What will it take for you to believe that we're serious?" "Concrete steps," Sarah said firmly. "I want to see a timeline, with clear deliverables and measurable goals. I want to see that your executives are held accountable, not just the lower-level employees. I want to know that you're prepared to walk away from your old ways of doing business. If you're not willing to make those changes, then we're done here." Robert sighed. "I'll take this back to the team. We'll make the necessary changes and get back to you." "Good," Sarah replied, her tone final. "And just so you know, I'm not waiting around. I'll be meeting with other companies who are actually ready to put their money where their mouth is. So make sure you come back with something that reflects the seriousness of this." She hung up the phone, feeling both frustrated and resolute. The ball was in their court now, but she wasn't going to wait forever. She had already given them a chance to prove themselves, and now it was time for them to deliver. But as she sat in her office, staring out at the city, she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't backing down. If they wanted her money, they would have to earn it. And if they didn't, well, she would walk away, and they would know exactly why. The clock was ticking, and Sarah wasn't going to give them more time than they deserved. The stakes were high, but Sarah had never been one to shy away from a challenge. She had a plan, a vision for a more equitable future, and she wasn't going to let anyone stand in her way. As she prepared to move forward, Sarah felt the weight of her decision. She wasn't just investing in a company. She was investing in a movement, a change that would ripple throughout the tech industry and beyond. And if she had to tear down a few walls to get there, so be it. She wasn't afraid to break the old systems. She was ready to build something new. And as the clock continued to tick, Sarah knew this was just the beginning. The next step was already waiting for her. The final step in Sarah's journey was fast approaching. After days of meetings, phone calls, and countless hours spent analyzing reports and negotiating terms, she knew the moment of truth had come. The company, which had once seemed so eager to prove itself, had failed to meet her demands. She had given them the chance to step up, to show that they were serious about creating real change, but they had faltered. Now, Sarah had a choice to make. Would she take the money from another company that had proven itself committed to diversity, inclusion, and real corporate transformation? Or would she continue to push for a culture shift at this company, risking everything for the chance to change the industry from within? As Sarah sat at her desk, she felt the weight of the decision on her shoulders. It wasn't just about the $10 billion investment. It was about something far bigger. It was about proving that a black woman, a woman who had faced every barrier and obstacle imaginable, could be the one to lead the charge for corporate accountability and change. It was about showing the industry that the future of business wouldn't be defined by the old guard, the wealthy, the powerful, and the corrupt. It would be defined by people who truly believed in progress, in lifting others up, in making sure that every voice, every idea, and every person had a place at the table. Her phone rang. It was Robert Grant again. His voice was more hesitant this time, his words carefully chosen. He had clearly received the message from their previous conversation. "Sarah," Robert began, "I've spoken to the team. We've reworked the proposal. I'm sorry for the oversight. We understand now how serious this is. We've made some drastic changes. We're ready to show you the commitment we should have shown from the start." Sarah paused, considering her options. She had been through enough to know when someone was simply trying to save face. But was this real? Or was it just another attempt to buy her silence with empty promises? She'd always trusted her instincts, and right now, something told her that the company might be ready to make real change. But only if they were willing to do the hard work, not just for show. They needed to prove it. "Okay," Sarah said, her voice calm but resolute. "Send the revised proposal to me. But understand this, the time for half measures is over. I'll be watching every step of the process. If you're serious, I'll know." As soon as she ended the call, Sarah turned her attention back to the documents spread across her desk. She had made up her mind. She wasn't going to let this opportunity slip away, but she also wasn't going to compromise her values. She had already seen too many companies give lip service to diversity and inclusion without ever addressing the root causes of inequality. She wasn't going to be another investor who simply bought into the rhetoric. Minutes later, the revised proposal appeared in her inbox. She opened it cautiously, scanning the key points. What she saw made her heart race. The changes were significant, and they weren't just surface-level tweaks. They had overhauled their leadership structure to ensure more diverse voices at the top. They had implemented strict timelines for hiring and promotion, with clear accountability measures in place. And perhaps most importantly, they had committed to transparency. No more hiding behind closed doors, no more manipulation of statistics. Sarah sat back in her chair, a sense of cautious optimism washing over her. This was it. This was the moment she had been fighting for. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start, and she knew she had played a part in making it happen. But even as she felt a sense of accomplishment, she knew that the battle wasn't over. The hard work was only beginning. It wasn't enough to just sign the contract and walk away. She needed to make sure that the changes stuck, that the company would follow through on its promises. And that meant continuing to hold them accountable every step of the way. As Sarah prepared to sign the deal, she reflected on the journey that had led her here. It had been a long, hard road. There had been moments of doubt, moments when she questioned whether it was worth it. But now, as she looked at the company's revised proposal, she realized that it had all been worth it. She had not only secured a $10 billion investment, but she had also forced an entire industry to reconsider its practices. She had shown them that there were consequences for inaction, for treating people like commodities, for perpetuating cultures of exclusion. She had proven that one voice, one person, could make a difference. And that difference could echo through the halls of corporate boardrooms for years to come. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from her team. "The media is picking up the story. They're calling it a historic move. They want an interview." Sarah smiled, a small but genuine smile. She had always known that the work she was doing was bigger than herself, bigger than her own company. It was about leaving a legacy, about creating a world where everyone had the opportunity to succeed. She stood up and walked to the window of her office, looking out at the city below. The sun was setting, casting a golden hue over the skyline. It was a peaceful moment, one that allowed her to savor her success. But as she stood there, she knew that her work wasn't done. There was always more to be done, more to change, more to fight for. And she would be there, every step of the way, holding the powerful accountable and ensuring that no one would ever again underestimate her or the people she represented. Sarah took a deep breath, her mind already shifting to the next phase of her plan. The world was changing, and she was at the forefront of that change. And as long as she had the power to influence, she would keep pushing, because that was what leaders did. They didn't just sit back and accept the status quo. They broke the mold, challenged the system, and built a better future for everyone. The phone rang once more. This time, it was a call from the company's CEO. Sarah answered, her voice calm, collected, and unwavering. "Sarah," the CEO said, "we've made the changes. We've heard you, and we're ready to follow through. We know we have a long way to go, but we're committed to doing the work, and we want you to be part of that journey." Sarah paused for a moment, considering his words. Then she spoke, her voice steady and full of conviction. "I'm glad to hear that," she said. "But understand this, I won't just be watching. I'll be pushing. And if you don't follow through, I'll walk away. I'm not in this for anything less than true transformation. Are you ready for that?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Finally, the CEO spoke again, his voice tinged with sincerity. "We're ready. We'll make it happen." And with that, Sarah knew she had achieved something extraordinary. She had turned the tide, broken down the barriers, and forced a culture shift that would ripple through the industry for years to come. But the work wasn't done yet. There was always more to do, and Sarah was ready to take on the next challenge. As Sarah's journey unfolded and her actions rippled across the corporate world, one thing became clear. Change begins with bold moves, and it's the brave ones who redefine the future. Just like Sarah, we all have the power to challenge the status quo, to stand up for what's right, and to make an impact that lasts. But now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever faced a moment where you had to make a tough decision to challenge an injustice? Or perhaps push for a change that others didn't believe possible? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's continue this conversation and learn from each other's experiences. If you found Sarah's story inspiring and you're ready to take charge of your own future, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Join us at Lixon Unique Stories for more powerful narratives like this one. We bring you stories of courage, transformation, and leadership that will inspire you to take action. And if you're looking for more inspiring stories about real change, check out the next video where we explore another incredible journey of someone challenging the odds and winning big. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. Remember, change doesn't come from waiting. It comes from those who dare to act. What bold move will you make today? Keep watching, stay inspired, and make your own mark on the world.